So there's this problem that I've been coming across recently where every time I read, watch, or consume something, it'll usually be like, hey man, I just started reading this manga. Oh nice.
What did you think of it?
And to be honest, that's a really hard question for me to answer. It's always been a struggle for me to put my feelings into words, so when you ask for me to share my opinion on something, I get scared. But today, I finally decided that things are going to be different. Today was going to be a day where I stood up for myself and talked about all of the manga that I've been reading this year. Some of them were good, some of them were bad, some of them were really good, and some of them were really bad. But the main goal is to talk about all of them, a lot of them, and compress them all into one big giant schizo rant of a video. By the way, if you're new here, I just want to let you know that this will probably be the furthest thing from a list of some cohesive manga reviews and recommendations. So if you came in with those expectations, then you should turn back now before it's too late. But if you're on page with that and want to see a 22-year-old talk about Japanese comic books that were either amazing or made me want to stab my thigh with a fork, then as always, feel free to strap in, grab a friend, grab a drink, put on your open-toed Crocs, and feel free to let me know if there's any mangas you think I might have missed out on. But before we go on this very hectic journey, we've got a word from our sponsor of this video. So as you guys all know, I'm literally the biggest fan of Chainsaw Man. And on top of that, I also legally identify as a gamer. It's actually marked down on my own license plate at this point. Now, wouldn't it just be great if I could go to a wishing well, chuck a couple pennies in there, and ask for something that could combine these two things? Well, thankfully, there's no need to be doing any more wishful thinking because Nikke Goddess of Victory is having a limited time event where you get to play their immersive RPG shooter as either Makima Power or Himeno. And when I say limited time, I mean literally at the time of this upload you could get it. Nikke is a cross-platform gaming experience where you get to recruit various maidens to form the ultimate alliance of combat specialists. And lucky for any of you manga readers, Tokyo's Special Division 4 is now standing alongside one of those recruits. Each character gets to have their own abilities and unique weapons. If you were to ask me which one I'll be personally picking, my answer would have to be Himeno, for certain reasons. Whether you prefer to have a much more immersive experience through PC or feel the need to chill out on the couch and play from your phone, Nikke Goddess of Victory brings everything to the table. It's got gameplay elements of a roguelike. Wow. It's got co-op. Oh. It's even got real-time combat combined with turn strategy. So what are you doing? Stop chucking pennies at that water fountain. Your wish is literally right here, right now at Nikke Goddess of Victory. Okay, so now that that's over, we can go right back to where we last left off, with the first one being a manga called The Story of Blue Giant is about a high school student named Dai Miyamoto, who out of nowhere decides to quit everything. He leaves his basketball team and gives up on school to pursue his dreams, to pursue his goal of becoming the greatest jazz musician to ever live. But the thing is that he has never played an instrument before, and when he says that out loud, all of his friends, family, and hell, even you as the reader think he's joking. But the reality is that he's not joking at all. And that's because the moment that Dai Miyamoto first came across the world of jazz, it was like magic. It was like an out-of-body experience. And from then on, it didn't matter how bad of an idea it was, Miyamoto knew he was going to pursue this until his body fucking imploded. He was determined to play that saxophone until it made the most beautiful sound on earth. And there's a moment where his brother wants to hear him out, to at least try to see where this random-ass 180 life decision was coming from. But rather than trying to explain it to him, Miyamoto just starts playing, and the panel that's followed up by this had me fucked up for days. His brother almost starts crying, and then I almost started crying. And let me just remind you here, this is all coming from a story about music that has no sound. Like, I don't even know how that works. But if I took a guess, I'd have to give so much credit to the author Shinichi Ishizuka. He has this way of putting so much power behind every single note that's being played. Look at these panels. You can just feel them. All of these musicians pouring their heart and soul into this. It just makes you feel inspired. It's a beautiful story about a guy who says, fuck you and fuck all this. I'm gonna do whatever I want and the world can't tell me otherwise. Coming from an author who clearly cares about this story as much as his own character loves jazz. It is the definition of motivational media. This manga just makes me want to do better. This manga makes me want to go out there and do the impossible. It makes me want to just punch a small dolphin 60 yards off a cliff. It makes me want to put a hole in my wall and then fuck my neighbor's dad. I just want to eat a whole eggplant and then fill my car's Okay, so before I go on this long schizo rant about why I fucking hated this manga, I just want to preface two things. One, I'm a huge fan of Junji Ito. I absolutely love his work. And two, the hatred that I have for Uzumaki is honestly not coming from a reasonable place. And that's because for over a year now, I've been wearing this shirt that I thought was pretty cool. But now I have this problem where every single time I wear it, I have to be reminded of how fucking dumb and stupid the manga was. Let me just ask a question for all the people who have both read this manga and also like this manga. The question being, when you read Uzumaki, what were these spirals? What were they supposed to mean? And do me a favor and just sit on that burger for some time while I go talk, because we're gonna walk back to that burger in just a second, okay? The manga starts off with this high school girl who spent her whole life living in the same small town. There's a point where she starts noticing some weird events that keep happening, like whirlwinds are appearing out of nowhere, the water supplies start looking like this, and even the sky itself is turning into a giant cinnamon roll. And to make things even worse, it starts to affect some of the people as well, like her boyfriend's dad starts to become obsessed with these patterns and puts them literally everywhere around his house. And soon after, he just goes straight up insane, to the point where his eyes are spinning in circles, and then his tongue turns into this. And then he dies. And this is where I start getting confused, because at this point, her boyfriend's dad just, I don't know, died. Yet for whatever reason, there seems to just be a complete lack of acknowledging the elephant in the room. Oh, wow. My dad just died. What happened? My dad just died. How did that happen? Well, he started looking at these patterns, and then he died. What patterns? Well, you see, there might be a correlation between my father's death and these spirals. What spirals? Why do you keep asking so many questions? What question? And while these two geniuses are figuring things out, the entire town is falling apart. One of her classmates starts to look like this and then proceeds to eat another student. An entire hospital gets taken over by crazy zombie moms. There's a girl that looks like this, and then later on, there's a couple that turns into spaghetti. And then the main character's hair starts to look, awfully familiar. And then, you're not ready for this one. And then a kid who's like hella ugly starts turning into a snail, and then there's this bully who starts picking on him for being a hella ugly snail, which by some strange fate of luck turns the bully into a snail as well. And then they just start having snail sex. Yeah, I don't know either. So I feel like any sane person would have started to pick up on the fact that anything resembling this pattern means bad news. And it takes the boyfriend a little bit to make the connection. But finally, midway through the book, he realizes that they should leave. Although it was pretty obvious after the first chapter, let's be honest here. So he tells her, we should leave. And she's like, why? And this is the main problem that I have. This person is quite literally in fucking La La Land. She cannot even comprehend why he would suggest that. It's not like everyone around them has been murdered or burnt alive in front of them. But they really chose to tell this story from the point of view of the dumbest person on earth. And maybe at this point, you're like, Alex, there's no way the main character is this oblivious. Dude, I shit you not, and I wrote this down, by the way. On page 276, she still has the audacity to ask, what's going on? What's going on? Are you out of your fucking mind? It's so obvious what's going on. How are you the only person that cannot seem to comprehend what's going on? Just leave. Just leave the fucking town. But she, for quite literally no reason, just refuses to leave. And then they die. And then everyone dies. And then it just ends. It just ends in the dumbest way humanly possible. And none of it made any fucking sense. I read 600 pages of the dumbest shit ever. So now that the story is done, let's revisit that burger one more time. To the people that are probably mad at me right now, please answer the question. What the fuck do these spirals mean? Is there supposed to be a theme behind them? Because I need someone to tell me what theme is supposed to justify homoerotic snail sex. So believe it or not, Blue Period's actually a manga that's held a special place in my heart for quite some time now. One of the main reasons is because by complete accident, it actually led me to discovering Blue Giant. There was a day where I was trying to find this first volume on my local bookstore, but since they didn't have any, I honestly just started looking around at any other blue stuff so that I wouldn't feel completely defeated, which then led me to picking up this volume instead. The other reason is because I've always loved this story since the anime first aired. I feel like I have a really weak spot for mangas that revolve around people who drop everything to pursue a goal of theirs. Whether it's jazz, painting, boxing, basketball, wrestling, croissants, or whatever the hell it is, it's almost like that passion becomes infectious to me. They just make me want to do better. And really believe me when I say that this manga is no exception to that. Blue Period is about this guy named Yagachi who's basically the definition of the ideal student. Good grades, good looks, spends most of his time studying, and has a prospective future that others could only dream of. The only problem, however, is that all of these things bring him no interest. Yagachi's always been that kind of guy who just does what other people want him to be, which has also led him to being the most bland sandwich of a person you could possibly imagine. No aspirations, no personality, and no sight of what he wants to do with his life. But on a random ass day and a random ass evening, a bit of curiosity leads him to the art studio that they have on campus, and he comes across this one painting that's standing in the front of the room, which starts to make him feel something, and he's not sure what it is exactly, but it was a feeling so strong that it made him realize something. It made him realize that he was done pretending, that he was sick and tired of being this persona that everyone expects him to be. And while this was probably only in the span of a few seconds, it ended up forever changing the course of Yagachi's life. From here on out, he was only left with one desire. He wanted to express the real version of him, and he figured the only way to do that was through the medium of art. And on the very next day, there's this teacher that passes out a form where students can fill out all the universities that they plan on applying to. And when Yagachi was given this form, he decided to only write down one school. And not just any school, he chooses the #1 art school in all of Japan. Now, I know I keep repeating myself, but mangas like this really just make me go. And while it may have a similar premise to the other blue manga that I've mentioned, there's actually a really unique case that comes with Yagachi's journey. I come from the perspective of someone who loves seeing a guy like Ippo constantly training to become the strongest, or Hinata taking every chance to become the best volleyball player. It's almost like an XP bar that lets us see these characters level up after a certain amount of coaching, training, practicing, and honing into their craft. But the thing that constantly gets emphasized in the story of Blue Period is that you can't just simply become more creative. In this case, putting more effort isn't necessarily a good thing. There's not really a clear answer as to what makes good art, which means that Yagachi has to go through a way more abstract journey to find that answer. How can one be more creative? How can he express himself in ways that have never been done before? How can he produce something meaningful, something that makes people feel the same way he did when he first came across that painting? And within that journey lies a path where Yagachi actually ends up learning more about himself than he ever did with anything else. It's a story about someone who has to dig deep to find all the colors that lie within them. And honest to God, it's made me become obsessed with this story, which has now led me back to the exact same problem. Whenever I really like a manga, I have this weird habit of doing an absurd amount of research for no reason. And now I'm in this weird position where I know a bunch of incredibly specific facts that I have no clue what to do with. For example, the author does this thing where she wears a gecko helmet everywhere she goes. It turns out that this pencil pose I see every artist do is actually a real thing. It's basically supposed to reference the proportions of whatever you're drawing. So if you ever want to try it, you just have to stick out your arm as far as possible and then take note of how much of the pencil it covers. And the name Blue Period actually refers to a very famous point in Picasso's career where he was only making paintings in different shades of blue. Apparently in the year of 1901, there was a certain event that led him into a deep state of depression, and if I were to lay out a timeline of his artwork, you could tell pretty easily at which point this all happened. And maybe there's a part of you that's wondering, what exactly happened to him? And I'm honestly really glad you asked that, Nathan, but come on now, that would just be ridiculous. I mean, I could answer that question, but I would never just waste people's time. I've literally never ever done that in a video before. So in 1901, Pablo Picasso moved to France with a buddy of his and ended up falling in love with a girl named Juujika Galgalo. But unfortunately, she has absolutely no interest in our boy Picasso. And then about a year later, his homie also starts falling in love with this one girl, to the point where he throws a big old party, invites her, and dedicates a whole speech on how he was going to propose to her. However, our beloved Juujika Galgalo declines the offer, which then made Picasso's homie pull out a gun, shoot her, and then he shoots himself in the temple. And then after that event, we have Picasso's Blue Period. Yeah, so anyways, like I was saying, but then this led me to doing more research about other famous artists. Like it turns out that a big inspiration for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure came from the statues made by Michelangelo. And believe it or not, while the turtles might have you thinking otherwise, Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci did not get along at all. Apparently, da Vinci was actually quoted saying, "This is not an accurate depiction of the male beauty standards." So then I started doing a weird amount of research into da Vinci, and oh boy, let me tell you about da Vinci, because this dude was fucking crazy. Like, first of all, he used to write all of his notes backwards, so when historians were trying to translate any bits of his research, they had to use a mirror to even understand what any of it meant. And then the other crazy thing is that most people only know him for being either a painter or a turtle. And as a painter, he was only known for his worst painting. Apparently, this dude was literally a fucking genius. People considered him to be a chemist, a philosopher, an engineer, a straight-up inventor for a billion things that were way too ahead of its time. He also made some of the most significant discoveries in human anatomy, which, by the way, he literally did most of these things just to draw better. Leonardo da Vinci is up there as one of the smartest humans to have ever existed. Yet again, it's either just a fucking turtle or a painting. The worst one, by the way. Oh boy, and don't even get me started on Van Gogh. I literally own a gigantic book on Van Gogh. Wait, hold on. What was this video about? Oh, right, manga. So you know how fans of Naruto have made a guide on what episodes to watch and which ones to avoid because of filler? Well, I decided to actually do the same thing for which chapters of Origin you should read and which ones you should avoid. So to anybody out there that's genuinely interested in checking out this manga, here's what you should do. Read the first chapter and then call it a fucking day. This manga is seriously the saddest case of draw the rest of the fucking horse. The first time I even found out about it was through that video where you guys recommended me 30 different mangas.
This is the fucking coolest panel to ever exist.
And I still hold by what I said to this day. Origin quite literally has one of the coolest first chapters I've ever seen. The main character is a samurai cyborg trying to blend in with the Yakuza, and it's drawn by Boichi. So I honestly have no clue how the fuck this manga turned out so bad. Let me tell you what happens. So the name Origin is supposed to refer to this dude who was the first ever AI to live among humans. And for reasons we don't know yet, the manga starts off with that same guy trying to blend in and act cool around a bunch of criminals. And at the time when I was reading this, it had such a ridiculous premise that I really felt like I was about to have the time of my life. Because not only was I provided with some absolutely gorgeous artwork, watching this guy try to autistically read social cues with criminals was honestly so funny to me. The dude will literally be like, "These humans just said a joke." Now, in order for me to act normal, it's estimated that 93.8% of jokes are followed up by either laughter or verbal acknowledgement. Factor in the variable of the ice. So just based on how all of this started out, I was fully on Team Boichi. I was ready to have the time of my life. I was ready to read a new favorite manga. And then I realized this dude did not think about anything past that first chapter. So our homie gets caught being a cyborg, saves the day, and starts going under a new identity named as Tanada. And it's at this point where it's revealed that the driving motive for Origin is that an old man told him to live a proper life. Now, maybe some of you find that to be a dumb premise, but at the time, I honestly couldn't care less. Literally, all I wanted from this manga was some good art and for my autistic robot samurai to fuck some shit up, which was the case for like a tiny bit, and then for some reason, the main character proceeds to get an office job. I don't know what about this premise would imply that an office job would somehow make that better, but again, I guess things just kind of work that way when your only motive is to live a proper life. But it was at this exact point where I started to realize something. This dude was just way too good at drawing for his own sake. Like, there's a part where he draws a double spread of him walking into the office. Why did he do that? Was I supposed to open that page and be like, oh my god, wow, a 9 to 5? But as the story continued to progress, there were less moments of this and more moments of this, and my brain was starting to feel confused. Because as more of these text bubbles kept coming, the more I realized there was something off about them. Before, I wasn't really paying that much attention to it, so every time there was a comically bad written character, I just assumed it was a villain that was probably going to be dead by the next chapter anyways. And that was the case for a little bit, but then we spent some time with some of the people that are supposed to be really important to the story. And then I realized, oh god, it's like this for everyone. Every single time there was a bubble next to one of these characters, bad things were starting to happen. And when those bubbles came from a female character, God forbid did things get bad. I'm actually fully aware of the fact that Boichi has had a long history of drawing hentai. So believe me when I say that I understand the reason for some of the artistic decisions. But there's also a part of me that kind of feels like the hentai writing also never left him, because every single female character in this manga has the personality of a horny salad bowl. Oh, sorry for greeting you like this.
Not a problem.
And again, that's not to make some absurd psychoanalyzation on the author. I just think he's good at all the non-bubble portions of the page. Like, it is such a weird experience to read this manga where the drawings are so compelling to look at, yet the writing revolves around a doki doki looking ass chick falling in love with a Samsung tablet that has abs. I guess if you genuinely wanted to try reading this manga, you could just maybe not read it. Like, you could just look at Origin, scroll through the chapters, grab a cup of tea, and just enjoy the nice pictures. And if anybody ever asks if you've read Origin before, you just say, no, but I have looked at Origin. I really do want to make it clear that I'm coming from a place of rooting for these mangas. It's not like I wanted Uzumaki to be a bad manga, but there's a reason why I'm calling it Uzumaki. And the exact same goes for Origin. I fucking love Boichi. That's my boy right there, which is why it's so frustrating that I have to read this absolute joke of a manga. And I guess, now that I think about it, the reason why this manga makes me so upset is because it reminds me of myself. It's kind of similar to the way I make videos. It's pretty to look at, but if you pay attention to the words, it's kind of just garbage. So recently I've decided to start doing a segment that I like to call Catching Up on Dandadan. And there's 3 reasons for why I wanted to do Catching Up on Dandadan. The first one was because I remember seeing a comment that made a joke about how it wouldn't be that surprising if they ended up introducing Hitler in the series. And at the time, I thought that was pretty funny. But now that it's almost been 8 months since I've seen that comment, I'm starting to realize that he probably wasn't joking. The second reason is because there is a percentage of people that are watching this video right now who still haven't read Dandadan. And I will not be satisfied until all 100% of you have And the third reason is because lately I've been seeing a lot of comments of people telling me that my voice is either too loud or too dramatic for them to listen to. So I decided to dedicate a segment to all the people who find the way I talk to be annoying. From here on out, I will be speaking in the most monotone and non-dramatic way possible. Okay, here I go. So Dandadan, I can't do this. So earlier we left off at a point where 2 of our main characters were fighting against every single famous composer in history. Since then, a new villain came along whose special ability is fucking soccer. And then that fight gets interrupted by a giant sentient worm that sets an entire village on fire. So then Momo proceeds to grab that worm and then use it as a fire hose. Then they go to school and find Ken's second ball sack. So they proceed to chase this ball sack down a hall, only for it to turn into Godzilla. And then they fight this Godzilla by morphing into a giant Buddha statue. And then that Buddha statue turns into like a mecha Power Ranger thingy. And then the next arc can literally be summed up by this single panel. Look at what is in this panel. There's a fucking xenomorph acting like Goku. There's another xenomorph that looks like a Boston Dynamics robot, which are all being supported by every single variation of aliens that has ever been depicted in the history of fiction. A fucking bike! And a cat. Anything goes. Literally anything goes with this manga. We're just gonna start taking an extremely accurate statistic as to how close we are from seeing Hitler at this point. Something like a Hitlometer, a Hitlerometer, I'd say we're 65% there. Alright, so for this next manga, I'm just going to be fully honest with you. There were a lot of people that were asking me to read this. 87 of them to be exact. And to the 87 people that left comments saying that I should read this, I just wanted to let you know that, you can all kindly go fuck yourselves. Let me give you a summary of what this story is about, okay? You have a little boy and 5 bullies. And these 5 bullies are really mean. Like really mean. And maybe you're thinking, Alex, they're little kids. Like, why do you keep being so dramatic? Well, they start picking on him, which makes the kid get really sad. So much so to the point that he stops going to school. Do you want to know what they end up doing to him? They murder his whole family. Okay, so now the kid has no family, and he decides to make it his mission to take revenge on these bullies. So he goes to his grandpa, who is basically like if John Wick served in Vietnam, and trains this kid to become the most dangerous, evil person in the world. And then the rest of the entire manga is this dude taking revenge on these 5 bullies in the worst way humanly possible. And all of that happens in the very first chapter. From here on out, I literally cannot show you any of the panels that come up after this, because this manga basically ends up becoming the most vile form of torture porn that I've ever seen in my life. And I just need you to know 2 things. One, I read this entire manga in one night. It has over 100 chapters, and like I physically wanted to stop reading it, but I literally couldn't. And the second thing is that after finishing this manga, I took a good look at myself in the mirror and just felt shame. Like a whole lot of shame. But, if you consider reading this anyways, just give yourself like every single trigger warning possible, and like do that twice before you decide to read something like this, because 87 people weren't willing to do that for me. So after that last video, one of the most common questions that I always get asked nowadays is if I've been caught up to the second part of Chainsaw Man. And to be fully honest, I really thought that after spending 4 months of doing nothing but eating, sleeping, and shitting Chainsaw Man, that I'd be completely sick of it by the time I finished making that video. But I hate to admit this, I literally binged the entire show and read all of part 2 right after I pressed upload. I just love the living shit out of this manga, and I don't think I'll ever stop feeling that way. It's so crazy to me that we live in a world where one of the best up-and-coming manga has now received one of the most creative, most outlandish, most absurd adaptations out there. You can smell from a mile away that literally every person involved in this poured their heart and soul into the show. And the exact same goes for part 2 of the series. It honestly reminds me so much of a Tarantino film, with the way Fujimoto just keeps making everything feel so over the top. The dialogue, the fight scenes, the wacky and creative paneling he does sometimes. And to be honest, that's all I really have to say. I feel like I've done my part in expressing every single emotion that I have towards this series. Although I seriously cannot wrap my head around the fact that there's now almost 1 million people who have watched this ridiculous video. It's by far the most I've ever poured my heart and soul into anything, and the fact that it led to such a positive response just blows my mind. But it also does make me feel a bit conflicted. On one hand, that's all I could ever ask for, but on the other hand, I'm not gonna make the same cannibalism joke again. There's a part of me that doesn't really know what to feel. There's now friends, family, and people from my school that actually found out I own a channel because of that video, and I'm not exactly sure what to think of that yet. What's also funny is that I've gotten the chance to witness other people attempting to describe what that video was even about, and I just find that adorable, because not even I know what that video is about. But more than anything, I just wanted to say that I feel insanely grateful. This manga started it all. The very reason why I have this channel today is because of amazing artists like Tatsuki Fujimoto. And now I'm in this hilarious, weird, and absurd position where I have to explain to my Hispanic mom that people on the internet listen to me talk about those same artists. I know I'm probably just repeating myself at this point, but I really wanted to dedicate this segment to say thank you. Thank you for even attempting to reciprocate and understand the way that I feel about art. This is by far the most gratifying thing that I get to have in my life now. Now, I'm just going to be fully honest here. It's been really hard for me to be able to come up with a script for how I feel about this manga. Like, I seriously cried by the end of it, but I'm not exactly sure how to word the feelings that it gave me. And a main reason for that is because of its author. If you've ever come across a story that's made by Inio Asano, you would know that reading his work is a way different experience from anything else. But if you've never even heard of him, it's really hard to try and put into words what that experience is even like. So bear with me here. This is like the 5th draft of me trying to write this, and honestly, the best solution I've come up with so far is to just think out loud. Around 2.5 years ago, I came across a manga called Oyasumi Punpun, and at the time, it probably was like one of the first 5 manga that I'd ever read. And when I finished reading it, I came to 2 realizations. The first one was that I wasn't aware I could cry that much tears, and the second realization was that I didn't even know some book full of drawings could leave such a lasting effect on me. I still think about that manga to this day. But back then, I didn't know much about manga. I had no reference as to what was supposed to be good, and and what was supposed to be great. But the more I've exposed myself to this art form, the more I've realized how special it is to read something that's made by Inio Asano. Now, I'm not exactly sure what it is yet, but part of me thinks it's his style of writing. It's almost like his dialogue is the closest thing to everyday conversation. The cadence, the awkwardness, the way none of it really even matters in the grand scheme of things. It allows for certain moments to feel real, to really hit a nerve that I didn't even know I had in me. Like, there's a scene in one of his mangas where the main character is stuck in between her two parents having an argument, and I remember this scene making me physically cringe, because then I had to look back on all the times I was in those exact same situations. And he somehow does this with every single moment that we've tried to bury away from our memories. Trauma, anxiety, nutting for the first time, nostalgia. It is seriously terrifying how he's able to present these weird and complicated mesh of emotions and present them to you on a silver platter. It's almost like he's saying, look, this is you. You probably have never wanted to see that, but I drew it anyways. And honestly, that's the best I've got. This is like the 10th time of me trying to describe what Solanin is even about and talking about the things that these mangas make me feel. I'm starting to lose my voice, and I am either just too stupid or can't find the right words to explain it. Solanin is a really short story that's made by one of my favorite authors. Read it or don't. It's completely your choice, and I would like to move on to the last manga where I have my voice back. So given that I finally got around to reading Vagabond, I started to develop a really small urge. Back in my early days of ever reading manga, I would always keep hearing about this one story that went by the name of Slam Dunk. I remember reading through maybe like the first 15 chapters and calling it a day after that. At the time, it honestly just wasn't for me. And that's partly due to the fact that I'd categorized myself as the most non-basketball loving, non-hooper, non-NBA fan possible. I've spent my whole life playing sports, yet for some reason, basketball just never made any sense to me. I didn't get the appeal, and I never understood why so many people loved it. And I'm just gonna say that one more time, I did not understand why people loved basketball. So for the longest time, this put me under the mindset that I just wasn't ever going to find myself having any interest in this manga. But it wasn't until very recently where I had discovered that it came from the exact same author that made Vagabond. And my first thought was, how? How the fuck was this made by the same guy? Because all I could remember from those first 15 chapters was a manga that just screamed early 90s to me. It was about this red-haired high school student whose only reason for joining the basketball team was because some girl that gives him nosebleeds happened to like that sport. That was it. That was the only reason for why he joined, and I just kind of thought it was dumb. I thought the writing was really corny. Like at one point, the captain of the basketball team gets really offended that this dude made fun of his sport, so he proceeds to gather the whole school to come watch them have a one-on-one. Like, listen, man, it's been 4 years since I was ever even in high school, but I'm pretty sure if you tried to announce a 1v1 to your whole school, they'd probably just tell you to shut the fuck up. But what changed was that I was finally given context, and the context was that all of this would somehow eventually lead to Vagabond. I didn't know how, but a really big part of me wanted to find out how that happened, because I really do believe one of the best parts about reading a manga is that you get to see how that author grows over the years. These stories take so long to make that it sometimes feels unrecognizable by the end of it. So I gave it another shot. After finishing Vagabond, I decided that I was going to attempt to read Slam Dunk. And when I say attempt, I really do mean that, because those first 50 chapters were rough to read. Let me explain. A lot of the initial impressions that I got from Slam Dunk was that I couldn't see what angle some of these characters were coming from. I didn't get why this dude was so angry all the time. I didn't get why Sakuragi was so dumb, and I didn't know why these two guys hated each other. It felt really campy at first, which wasn't a bad thing. I think Takehiko Inoue himself has even admitted that there was a lot of room for him to grow in the first parts of Slam Dunk, which in hindsight makes a lot of sense. He was such a young and new mangaka at the time, so this was to be expected. But in tiny, and I mean tiny bursts of moments, I felt like there was a spark. Throughout those 50 chapters, there were certain moments that told me to keep going. They were telling me to give it just one more chapter. Moments that made me think to myself, oh, maybe this guy initially joined the team because he's tall and he likes a girl, but I think we might have accidentally found something special here. And each one of these characters were starting to have their own spark. Moments that made me finally understand why each one of these fucking idiots cares so much about this sport. Why Akagi stays after practice. Why the only thing Hanamichi can think of is when's the next time he gets to play. Why these dudes put so much of their time and energy into this stupid little high school club that they're in. And it all finally leads to a certain point in the manga. Now, I'm just gonna preface something that might be a surprise to you here, but I have never never spoken to Takehiko Inoue. I do not know the guy. Therefore, what I'm about to say is purely just me guessing and using my dumb imagination here. But there's a certain part in this manga where it's almost like they flipped a switch. The very reason why I decided to read Slam Dunk was to find out the answer as to how Takehiko Inoue became Takehiko Inoue. I wanted to know what was the thing that caused this man to become one of the greatest manga authors of all time. And then I finally understood how. For the first portion of this manga, there's a set of 3 characters that are basically the main players for their team. Those 3 players are Sakuragi, Akagi, and Rukawa. And it's not until later on where we get introduced to the other 2 final missing players. And it's not until the very last one that it becomes the most brutal moment. A bloody, gruesome, and literally tearful beatdown has to happen for them to find their last piece of the puzzle, their 5th member, Mitsui. Now, I have no definitive proof of this ever happening, but after this chapter, it was almost like Takehiko Inoue had a moment with himself where he said, "Fuck it, I'm gonna make the greatest sports manga of all time." And once they finally formed the 5 main pieces of this team, the events that happened after this was like actual magic. Not only does the art improve by an inhuman amount, the main matches that happen in this manga are some of the most intense head-to-head moments that I have ever seen in my life. And believe me when I say that's not a fucking exaggeration. You wanna know how I can prove that? There's a certain match where they play against their main rival school. And at this point, there was so much on the line. Not only have they already lost to them in the past, they were the one and only thing that was holding them back from making it to nationals this year. There was a certain amount of tension that you could literally smell from the players on both teams. And you want to know what happened? When the match started, a certain song started playing in the back of my mind. Now, at no point was I instructed to hear that song. The moment was just so intense, had me so at the edge of my seat, that fucking ABBA started playing in my head. Do you know how good a manga has to be for fucking ABBA to start unironically playing out of nowhere? I have never in my life felt any emotional attachment to the sport of basketball, but somehow Takehiko Inoue managed to do it. He somehow managed to make me understand the love and affection that these players have for it. The very reason why they're all willing to put their life on the line over this stupid little sport. And believe me, I'm fully aware of the fact that I've now given YouTube an opportunity to copyright this video to shit. But you know what? It's a shit that I don't give. I don't need anyone to tell me what I can and can't do. I don't need anyone to stop me from telling you how much I loved this manga. You can't stop me. I won't allow for any of these rules to hold me back from saying that this manga made me laugh and cry and feel excited like an insane person. So go for it. Do it. How about you take that ad revenue money and then shove it up your ass?
She kissed like I used to kiss you. Does it feel the same when she calls your name?